Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the latest episode of the Quintessential Performance Insights with me, Ashley Hughes. And today I've got a really good friend of mine, performance coach, consultant, designer, architect of attitude change technology, and many, many more things, which we'll go through hopefully today. Mr. Mark Woodhouse. Mark, thanks very much for joining me.
Good afternoon, Ash, and absolute pleasure. Really looking forward to it.
Cool. Thanks very much, mate. Like with all of these that we're doing, these insights, and it's all about sort of human performance and what your specific insight is and what your perspective is on it. But before we delve into that, I'd love it if you could sort of give us a bit of a bio about who you are, how you got to where you are, what you've done, you know, in your life.
Okay. What I'd like to do is obviously use this PowerPoint presentation, really just to support my narrative, and most importantly, you know, keep me on track and stop me from rambling too much. So, in terms of a basic bio and a little bit about my learning journey, like yourself, I served in the British Army. So I left the military in, what would it be, 1997, having joined up in 1984. Initially, I was an avionics technician in the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, so it was a very technical trade. But I've been totally sold when I joined the Army on the idea of soldier first, tradesman second. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, my experience, my first 3 years in the Army, I was tradesman first, tradesman second, tradesman third. Which was a little bit frustrating. And at school, I'd really been into my fitness, and now I was very much getting into military fitness, mm-hmm. and looking at being a peak performer in that sort of an area. So I made some changes in terms of career and transferred to the Army Physical Training Corps. Mm-hmm. Now the relevance of that is that actually, what started to happen was that, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, the way that my learning journey went, I realized that the British Army, fantastic as it was, really wasn't going to give me the opportunities that I wanted. Mm-hmm. So when I left the military, I started up my own consulting company. It's quite niche. We specialize in the areas of performance, but also learning, communication, and change. Yeah. And we're very much focused around the design, development, and delivery of training systems. So not just training, but training systems and embedding these systems within organizations, all with ideas around unlocking people potential and maximizing people performance. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we operate as an ILM center, an Institute of Leadership and Management center. And we like to position ourselves as a center of excellence purely because we've got a very specific focus. So our specialism as a center is coaching and mentoring, specifically evidence-based coaching and mentoring. Yep. And we offer a range of qualifications at level 3, at level 5, at level 7, and also in coaching supervision. Mm-hmm. In terms of the learning journey, though, and this will go back to joining the British Army, I've always had an interest in how things work. So it was interesting when I transferred into the Army Physical Training Corps and starting to look at the mind-body connection. That interest was such that I started to have a look at going back to study. Yeah. And I enrolled on a sports science degree. Now, for me, it was absolutely fascinating because I'd gone through by then sort of 6 years, around about 6 years in the British Army. And what the sports science degree did, it gave me an opportunity to reflect on my own performance as an individual, mm-hmm. and what we might call, what are the secrets of success. So going through the course, what I started to reflect on was, first of all, I'd always been quite a bright lad, and that's how I got into the REME as a technician. But reflecting on that selection process, and particularly the training process, there were people far, far brighter than me that fell by the wayside. Yeah. And likewise, when I started to look in the physical domain, particularly at pre-parachute selection, which I know that you went through as well, mm-hmm. I'd always been, a fit lad. Mm-hmm. but again, you know, on pre-parachute selection, there were people far, far fitter than me that fell by the wayside. So the learning that I got from that was that technical knowledge and physical skills are always going to be important, but it's fundamentally a person's attitude that determines their altitude, and it's a person's attitude that is key.
Yeah.
And what this sports science degree was allowing me to do was actually see, you know, what the structure of success was. And rather than just looking at performance as being an art, which I believe it is, this was giving me the structure in terms of the science. So that was me. That was me and my learning journey. And that was the main reason why, with those sorts of insights that I was getting, you know, from the sports science degree, when I got back on, you know, when I was looking at my career path within the military, I was fortunate enough to be on fast track promotion, but it was taking me further and further away from where I really wanted to be, which was sharing this information within an education and training space rather than being sat behind a desk.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, thanks for sharing that with us, Mark. So let's sort of delve a little bit deeper into sort of the main crux. And, you know, you've touched on human performance on loads of those little points there, and sort of obviously peak performance is sort of a trait that you can see that runs, you know, through your career and everything you've done so far. So it's obviously integral to you. But what does human performance mean to you? What is your perspective on it?
Okay, in terms of my viewpoint, and again, it's largely based on my own experience, and then supported by, you know, some of the you know, the studies and the science-based programs that I've been fortunate enough to be able to enroll on. But the conclusions I've drawn is, first of all, the potential of people is infinite, it's unlimited. But of course, you know, the main limitation that people tend to have is their beliefs about their potential.
Yeah.
You know, so it's infinite, but many people just don't realize it. And consequently, they get stuck in these limiting beliefs about who they are and what their potential is. And they fail to ask the big questions where they start to, you know, ask to what extent their own beliefs about potential are true. And unfortunately, you know, they often get bogged down in what the beliefs of other people are as well. And that tends to inherently limit their performance as well. You know, so for me, you know, it's about asking the big questions, and this is where the philosophy comes in. You know, so some basic questions might be, you know, what do I really want to do with my life? You know, we're here for arguably for a finite period of time. You know, it's a great opportunity. You know, the world is a fantastic environment. It's a case of, you know, how can I, you know, take up on this opportunity to achieve, you know, all that I want to achieve and become all I want to become.
Yeah. So
going back to, you know, that theme, it's about how can I make a difference? You know, how can I go mad rather than get mad? And again, it's, you know, for me, it's at the level of identity that, you know, people should start to ask those sorts of questions. Ultimately, though, it comes down to asking the questions about, you know, what are the secrets of success? Because there are lots of people out there that are incredibly successful. There are lots of peak performers. It doesn't matter, you know, what domain, what context we look at, whether it's business, whether it's sport, you know, whether it's in family life. And of course, these are all role models of success from whom we can learn these skills and strategies ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, for me, it comes down to three main attitudes. First of all is curiosity, starting to ask simple questions and not getting bogged down in this idea about stupid questions. Because in my experience, the only stupid question is the one that we don't ask. Right. And Einstein, you know, was attributed with a famous conclusion where, you know, he said that, you know, the thing about answers, they're always changing. But interestingly, the questions remain the same. So my frustration is why does traditional education continue to try to teach people the answers? What we should be teaching them is the questions to ask, so they can find answers, you know, to their own questions, and importantly, solutions to their own problems.
Absolutely.
Building on those, on curiosity though, is experimentation. So it's trying things out and trying things on. Trying things out is about, you know, trying different actions, different behaviors to see if you get a different result. Trying things on is taking on other people's values and beliefs and seeing whether they work better for you or not.
Yeah.
Finally, acting as if, well, that's about acting as if it's going to work, even if it doesn't. Because whether you believe something will or whether you believe it won't, you'll ultimately, prove yourself right. So again, it's about choice in your beliefs. And then acting as if is also, related to faking it until you make it, because you'll never know until you give it a go. But a key thing, and I think it was Aristotle that said this when he was on one of our courses, and he made the point that excellence is a habit, not an act.
Absolutely.
So one act, okay, that's an occurrence. 2 acts, it might be a coincidence. 3, and you're starting to condition, a habit or a pattern. Yeah. And for me, it's that marriage of, the philosophy of asking the big questions and the psychology, studying the secrets of success, learning from other people, that is tantamount to, what we've packaged as our toolbox of tools and techniques, which we call attitude change technology.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you just mentioned there about, the sort of consistency. And I wrote a little article last week, I think it was, and I was debating motivation over commitment. Motivation will only get you so far, and arguably don't really need it, because it can be good or bad, and it's pretty fickle at times. But commitment, regardless of motivation, if you commit to do something every single day, then you will progress in whatever you choose to do. Yes, it's a really interesting topic. Again, I'd like to, if you wouldn't mind, just delve a little bit more into sort of what are the secrets of success. You touched on it there a lot. So if we just go into a bit more depth, if you don't mind in that. So what do you think is the secret to success?
Okay, so if we look at a basic model, which we tend to frame as the performance equation, and I've borrowed this from a guy called Tim Galway, and in around about 1974, 73, 74, he wrote what was a landmark text within sport, or the context of sport and sports psychology, which was the inner game of tennis.
Yeah.
Now it's not really about tennis. He was using tennis as a metaphor because he was a tennis coach, but he was also an academic at a university.
Yeah.
We came up with a basic equation where he was talking about, first of all, we got this thing, performance. And there's a direct relationship between a person's performance and their potential. And then when you look at why people invariably don't, or most people don't achieve the sorts of results, the performance that they're arguably capable of, what he was recognizing is that it comes down to either interference, from internal or external factors, but the key factor was a person's own psychology. And the reason why he had it as a negative sign here, what he was talking about was the fact that everybody has got the potential for a positive psychology. But of course, through the process of learning, particularly if they've had negative experiences where they're younger, either at school within the family top context, they tend to develop a negative psychology, where the mind tends to work against them rather than for them. So breaking this down, we can look at performance is really about the actions that you take and then the results that you get. Of course, there's a difference between actions and results in that, you get some people that do a lot but don't achieve a lot.
Yeah.
But when we look at human potential, it's about the knowledge and skills that we already have, but most importantly, it's about the potential that we have to learn new skills.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of people will look in the mirror and what they'll see is an acorn. Now, I'm using that meta, in terms of a seed of potential, because people tend to believe in acorns and the potential for that seed to become not only an oak tree, but a whole forest of oak trees.
Yeah.
But most people with themselves, they'll look in the mirror and all they'll see is an acorn. And of course, that's not too impressive. So again, it's the ability to look past who you are and actually see the potential in terms of who you could be. And that's where the psychology comes in, because the factors that tend to affect people's mindset or their psychology Because psychology is just the study of mind and behavior. It tends to be things like a lack of confidence. So that's where the negative comes in, a lack of confidence, a lack of motivation or commitment, an inability to deal with stress, and a negative attitude in general, particularly to this concept of potential and the ability to learn. And what Galway was doing, he was using this to talk about the philosophy of coaching. And he was saying that coaching is the key to unlock a person's true potential with which to maximize their own performance. So going back to the science of success, that's where our attitude change technology comes in, because it's a toolbox of tools and techniques with which to change a person's attitude. Develop the attitudes of curiosity, experimentation, and acting as if, and using those as the keys to develop a positive psychology, and in that way unlock a person's potential to maximize the performance.
Absolutely.
So of course, philosophy is good. You know, I love it because it's asking the bigger questions. So this is where we get the art of performance, but it's not until we start to look at the psychology of success, performance psychology, that we start to see the structure. So if we look at now the core constructs, and these are simple little models. At this end, we've got the practical end. So we've got the GROW model, which is very well known, popularized by John Whitmore in the book Coaching for Performance. Again, another game changer. But the model itself was actually developed by a guy called Graham Alexander. And again, you know, what John did, because he was working alongside Tim Galway, he developed the philosophy of coaching and coaching performance and using the GROW model on the back of the inner game philosophy. So going back to that, what this says is to master the outer game of performance. In order to win the outer game of performance, you need to master the inner game of your own psychology.
Absolutely.
So that's the inner game and the outer game philosophy. So in terms of, right, how do you master your own performance? John Whitmore came up with this really useful model, the GROW model, whereby we can identify the goal, reflect on where we are in relation to that goal in terms of our reality. So that's the R in GROW. Consider the options, the different routes by which we might make our goal a reality, and then make a firm commitment in terms of what we will do then to make our goal a reality. So it's very much about goal setting and goal getting. You know, starting with the end in mind, putting first things first, and then very much taking action and finding out what works and what doesn't. If we then look at this model here, which we borrowed from Carl Rogers. So when we're looking at our own beliefs about ourselves in terms of our conception or our self-concept, Carl Rogers got us to think about there's again 4 components. There's this component up at the top called the ideal self, the type of person that we'd like to be, how we'd like to see ourselves. There's a bottom component in terms of who we are at this particular moment in time. Then he looked at something called self-esteem, and then borrowing some of the stuff from Maslow, looking at self-actualization. So what he was looking at is self-esteem is a feeling. The ideal self and the self-concept or the self-image down here are very much cognitive. They're belief-based. They're about how we think. And of course, it's not thoughts that drive people, it's feelings. It's their emotions. So he was looking at self-esteem as, and actually low self-esteem has been a positive. It's trying to drive you towards, your ideal self. So it's just replicating. What we can look at is, the pleasure of achieving your goal here and towards motivation. You can have, the negative of, away from motivation, driving you away from where you are. And he was just looking at high self-image and high self-esteem and low self-esteem. Low self-esteem should be a driving force here. And then the ABC model very simply looks at the cognitive, the affective, and the behavioral. So how you think, how you feel, and how that affects your behavior, and some of the barriers that stop people from unlocking their true potential to maximize their performance. So these core constructs are very useful maps. As I said, they just show the structure of peak performance.
Yeah.
And what they do is they enable people to look at the philosophy, the inner game philosophy, and start to marry it up with the psychology of peak performance.
Absolutely. And I, I love about that, again, you could correct if I'm wrong, but it's context free. That can work in sport, in life, in business, in any context, can't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And without killing people with pictures, although I've got a firm belief that a picture paints 1,000 words, there was a landmark text in cognitive psychology, written around about 1960. George Miller, Carl Pribram, and Eugene Galento. And what they were looking at was the way that people think and how they will structure their own plans with which to structure then behavioral outcomes. And one of the most important models that came out of this, it's typically called the TOTE model, in terms of test, operate, test, and exit. But if we put another component here, we tend to come into the world with our own beliefs. We enter the world with our own beliefs about who we are and what we're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here it's a case of, start to test, start to ask, some questions about those beliefs. Start to think about, if I was to adopt the beliefs of a peak performer, and if I was to do some of the things that peak performers do, what would happen? So you basically set the test conditions up here in terms of the new beliefs that you want to establish, but then you've got to take action to find out what works and what doesn't for you.
Absolutely.
And then you retest using the same criteria as you did here, and you basically keep going around that cycle until you get the results that you want. So that process of plan, do, and review, for me, that's the key to learning. And of course, once we've found out what works and what doesn't, that's where we can exit with our model of success. And arguably that's where it's always nice to be able to teach it to others.
Absolutely. And again, it highlights the power of sort of experiential learning. You can't learn, well, sorry, you can learn sat in a classroom, but the best way to learn is to do, and that's the only way you'll get a result, is by doing something and taking action. Again, it's such a powerful model to demonstrate that with sort of the academia to back it up as well. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in the academic space, there's all this talk about empirical this, empirical that, empirical evidence. And if we look at what empirical actually means, it means through experience. And the challenge with some academics, I think, is that they know a lot, they're very bright, but most of their learning comes from books.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the other hand, you've got practitioners that might not consciously know and be able to communicate how they do what they do. But what they have got is bags of experience, through the university of life.
Absolutely.
And, for me, this is where you can start to marriage up, curious academics with peak performing, practitioners. That's where we can start to experiment then, and then share these, what are often very simple secrets of success with others.
Absolutely. And I think it's off you that the quote or the comments, or common sense is not all common sense is not always common practice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also you get people go, oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. And you go, okay, yeah, if you know it, why aren't you acting upon what you know? Because, performance isn't about what you know, it's what you do with what you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That recording. Cool. Mate, that's fantastic. So obviously we've touched on a bit of academia there, and I know sort of, and you introduced us to a bit of the stuff that you've done, but what are you doing right now? So where are you at currently in your own studies?
Right. So my current studies, I'm currently in the process of completing a professional doctorate in elite performance. up at the University of Central Lancashire. But arguably, that's just the the most recent set of studies in a long line of development that started, as I said, within the military with my my first sports science degree. And funnily enough, the research that I was doing there was looking at something called the self esteem hypothesis. So it was looking at peak performance, and it was looking at the in-group and out-group biasing that we often have. At the time, I was looking at the military in terms of soldier first and tradesman second.
A bit personal.
Yeah, and how we're in the same military, and yet when we're talking about worthiness and how we attribute self-esteem and self-worth within our groups, how this thing about self-biasing actually operates. And what I realized that I was doing, one way of getting round those sorts of biasing, I was doing lots of courses that would get me badges. So I was essentially badge collecting. But of course, these badges as symbols of what I could do were changing people's perception of who I was.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at the time, I didn't really relate that research to how I was going to progress. But the key thing about the sports science degree was that it introduced me to something called personal construct theory, in terms of how we construct our own models of the world, and how these become our own mental maps. So that was key, because I then started to construct my own models and relate these to my own personal coaching model. And the second academic program that I did was an MSc in Organization Development and Neuro-Linguistic Technologies. So what we were looking at is how can we develop peak performing organizations and influence people's mindsets with just conversation. So again, how can effective questions and developing a safe environment for people to start to think about the big questions, how can they radically change things, not just at the individual level or the team level, but organizationally. So looking at systems theory and the impact of systems, developing systems within organizations. The research that I did there was looking at the fit and function of attitude change technology as a model and a methodology. The next set of studies I did, I was looking at the evidence and efficacy of attitude change technology, but with specifically in an evidence-based coaching and mentoring context. So there were a whole range of studies that I did there, and then very similar, but looking at relevance and rigor. I did a study, whilst I was doing my postgraduate certificate in education and training. So here I was looking at what's known as the scientist practitioner model, in terms of combining again art with science, but now within the domain of education rather than organizations, and how we teach what we know. But throughout, it's been looking at models and methodology, what we do and how we do what we do within multiple performance contexts. And ultimately, it's about the evidence base. So where's the evidence come from as to whether efficacy, whether ACT works, and as a systems approach. And all I'm really looking to do with the doctorate, because it's the highest level of testing your own assumptions, so going back to plans and the structure of behavior, all I'm looking at doing is presenting a model that I think is useful in multiple performance contexts. I'm not saying it's the only model. I'm not even saying it's the best model. I'm just saying it's a model and a methodology that, in my experience and the experiences of people that we've trained in this, they found it really, really useful. Second thing is validating that model, and then in the academic circles, legitimizing my own claims to knowledge. There's a lot of tension at the moment between academics and practitioners as to who can legitimately claim to be builders and testers of theory and owners of knowledge in their own right. I'd like to contribute to the evidence-based literature.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's about, sharing my own experiences, and most importantly, the experiences of the team that I'm privileged to work with, and indeed, the other practitioners and master practitioners that I've had the privilege of working with, because of course a lot of my experiences have come from them.
Mm-hmm.
And then if only in some small way, I'd love to help bridge the academic practitioner divide and get academics and practitioners collaborating more effectively, for the benefit of all. And again, if only in some small way, start to help advance coaching to becoming, a true profession.
Yeah, that would be a wonderful thing to do. And again, we've discussed it at length. This sort of anyone can be a coach sort of thing, or anyone can say they can be a coach, but actually, we need to professionalize the sort of the industry and what we do. And again, bridging that academic and practitioner divide is a key way of doing it. And evidence.
Yeah, for me, I think you're so right, Ash. It's about combining that passion that invariably those people have, mm-hmm. with a true understanding of the philosophy, and then most importantly, on the psychology, and then starting to embed that within programs that are going to give them the relevant certifications, following the regulated systems, so that they can position themselves as professional and in their own way advance the profession.
Yes, absolutely. What I wanted to ask was, what, if any, is sort of the difference in sort of attitude from 2006 when you did your MSc to now within the OD space and everything that you were trying to sort of introduce them to? What is the difference from then and now?
Okay, so if we look at organization development, which arguably encompasses three elements. There's organizational design. Mm-hmm. So this is where practitioners within that field are like cultural architects. Again, they're looking at organizational structures and cultural structures. Mm-hmm. You've then got organization development, which is typically linked to learning and development programs, but with a bigger agenda. And then you've got organizational delivery, which is about change.
Yeah.
The challenge with change, of course, is that most people are resistant to change. So when they find out who the change agent is, they tend to try and assassinate the change agent. So this is where OD consultants, they're often seen as like the gladiators of the human resources, space.
Yeah.
And going back to the learning organization, which is a term coined arguably by Peter Senge.
Yep.
In the fifth discipline, it's an organization that has learned to continually transform itself to deal with the challenge of change, and it's recognized as the blueprint in terms of how organizations will have to behave in the future, mm-hmm. in order to not only thrive, but in order to survive. The interesting thing about the fifth discipline is that I think it was written in 1990. And the five disciplines are personal mastery, mental models, shared vision, team learning. Mm-hmm. And then we've got the fifth discipline itself is systems thinking, which I tend to describe to people as, the ability to join up the dots and think outside of the box. Mm-hmm. But going back to, the ideas around the art and science, or the art and practice of the learning organization, go back to 1990. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was interesting. My MSc, when I first really started to delve into the science of how we develop learning organizations, the concept had been around for, quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And people were wandering around with a book, but not applying the principles. Yeah. And that was the same for coaching. Coaching, people were starting to get into coaching, but arguably, it was in its infancy. Mm. But what has happened in the last 10 years, particular, so probably, from about 2010 to now, mm-hmm. There's been a massive shift where arguably because of things like COVID, people are recognizing the need to change, and going back to, you know, the big questions, they're recognizing the need to start to take responsibility,
absolutely,
become more aware,
yeah,
and actually, you know, take action.
absolutely.
So I think there's been a massive shift, you know, since,
It
you know,
definitely
since then.
has, and I think one of the catalysts for it was obviously the 2008 financial crash, and there was a study, and I can't remember who it was done by, but it was a study done into which organisations had survived or thrived during it and survived, and those that
Yeah,
had recovered quickly, and they were trying to figure out what was the difference between those that had and those that hadn't.
yeah,
One of their suggestions was that it was those that had invested in their people.
yeah,
So when all the budgets are being cut, like everything is right now in COVID, you know, people, rather the companies that didn't survive were those that didn't invest in the people and sort of left personal development, you know, to last until they had some profit, didn't actually survive or recover. But those that sort of realized that the people are the most important thing in
yeah,
an organization and invested into them, when everything else was being cut, were actually the ones that survived. And again, it'll be an interesting study to do after this current crisis as well.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting, Ash. As you know, McKinsey company, as a, you know, as a group of consultants, you know, real top notch,
Mm-hmm.
and they came out with what they call the organizational health model.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which looks at how, not only how do you develop empowering cultures, but how do you, you know, create climates where people can flourish and grow.
Yeah.
And interestingly, within that model, explicitly, that they anchor the inner game philosophy of Tim Galway,
Mm-hmm.
and explicitly they talk about the need for coaching and mentoring, and to move from nascent, so, you know, just knowing about coaching and mentoring,
Yeah.
into, you know, the tactical, where you're starting to use skills,
Mm-hmm.
into the strategic, where you're starting to use coaching and mentoring as a strategy, but ultimately where you embed it within the system.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thankfully things are starting to change.
Mm-hmm.
But whether we're going to learn from those experiences, you know, time will tell.
Time will tell. We shall
Well,
see.
it was like the First World War, wasn't it? The war to end all wars. You know, I
Apparently.
hope, you know, we've learned it won't happen again. Oh, so we had the Second World War.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you know, we didn't call them world wars. You know, we called them Gulf Wars, didn't we?
True. Yeah. Yeah. So it's an interesting time, and like I said, yeah, you know, these things are hopefully coming to the fore. People can actually see the power within them, and we can only do that by building up the evidence so everyone can see. You know,
Yeah,
which is, you know, not everyone reads academic papers, unfortunately. So you've got to make that evidence. You've got to bring it to sort of the layman
yeah,
and do that. You know, which is our role to do. It's what we're here to do. It's our job. So cool. Really appreciate that. Sort of just drawing down and finishing off. So if anyone wants to find out any more about you and what you do in your company, where do they go, or what can they do?
Okay, so finding out more. I mean, you know, first of all, with regards to the models and stuff that I've just gone through, there's some references, you know, touching on the academic side. So you got Tim Galway, Carl Rogers, Rosenberg and Hovland. They're the people that came up with the ABC model, the one that we use. You've got John Whitmore, and then you've got our own material, just mentioned at the bottom. But we run an annual schedule of courses where people can learn the, you know, the knowledge and skills at various different levels.
Yeah.
All of the courses are linked to professional qualifications in evidence-based coaching and mentoring at levels 3, 5, and 7, so right up to master's level. We work with individual teams and in the main organizations on big change projects. Throughout, our vision is about creating environments and opportunities for people to both do and be their best. Mission, unlocking people potential, maximizing people performance.
Yeah.
Our strategy is around the design, development, delivery of training systems. And our values, as I said, very much reflect the performance equation. So we got performance, we've got potential and psychology, and then people, planet, profit.
Yeah.
We do consulting, training, coaching, and mentoring. We apply hard science and soft skills approaches within a business context, but ultimately, as you know, we're about performance, values-based leadership, and organization development. And if people want to get in touch, there's my details.
Cool. Thank you very much. Cool, Mark. Thanks very much for sharing your insights and sort of your perspective on human performance. I'm massively interested in the work that you do. I'm a student of yours. I'm a student of ATT. I firmly believe in it because it is evidence based. And I've applied it during my life over the past sort of 15 years. So I believe in its results. So fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing it, and hopefully we can spread the good word about it and bring coaching to the norm, and so it becomes a bit more more practical, and sort of more people are aware of the benefits of it. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Ash. You know what it's like. It's always a privilege to learn. It's even greater privilege to be able to share.
Absolutely.
And if any of the stuff that we've gone through has helped anybody in any way in terms of signposting things that they might want to do differently, then we'll have achieved our aim. So take good care, and to everybody listening, stay safe and well.
Cool. Thank you very much, Mark. And yeah, likewise, stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.